Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first teleforum event. My name is Ryan Chapman of Farrar, Straus & Giroux, the publisher of Michael Sandel's Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? Today, you'll be able to discuss the book and essential questions of moral philosophy with Professor Sandel. If at any time you'd like to ask a question, simply press *3 on your phone. You'll be directed through a brief screening process before connecting live and on air. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce Professor Sandel and his book. We're calling from Harvard, where his course on justice is consistently among the most popular on campus. The book grew out of this class and went on to become a New York Times bestseller in both hardcover and paperback. If you haven't read it already, you'll find a lot of the ideas and discussions from today's teleforum in the book. Walter Isaacson says, this book is absolutely indispensable for anyone who wants to be a good citizen. Michael Sandel is the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard University, where he has taught since 1980, and the author of many books. In 2009, WGBH produced a 12-part television series on the course, which can be viewed online for free at justiceharvard.org. I think we're ready to begin. Remember, if you have a question anytime, press *3. Professor Sandel, take it away.
Thanks very much, Ryan, and thanks to all of you for joining in this experiment, really, to have a live discussion of my book, Justice, with those of you who have signed up to participate and phoned in from around different places around the country. I have a range of topics from the book that connect up with some of the things that are in the headlines even today that I would like to get your views about, and I may ask you your views. You're able to register your views on a polling device that we have, but I also want to remind you that you are free at any point to put a question on any topic related to the book that you would like to discuss by pressing *3 and asking your question, and then we can have a live exchange, at least about some of the questions. But while people are thinking of questions they might like to ask, I would like to put out for your consideration a couple of the topics, a couple of the questions about justice that many of the philosophers shed light on, but that really come out of the headlines. In the recent midterm elections, one of the big issues between Democrats and Republicans was the question of whether to extend the Bush tax cuts for everyone or only for those who make $250,000 or less. This is one of the main differences between the Democratic and the Republican positions. Now, part of the debate over the tax cuts has to do with practical questions, economic questions, such as the effect on the deficit, on economic growth and jobs. But another big question looming over this debate is what's fair? What is a fair way or a just way of distributing the benefits and burdens of citizenship? It was pointed out in a column in today's New York Times that the top 1% of the population, the richest 1% in the United States, today receive 24% of national income. They also hold more than a third of national wealth. So here's a question of distributive justice. Is it fair that the top 1% receive such a large share of national income and wealth, or is it unfair? Different philosophies of justice hold different views about this. So why don't we make this our first poll question? If you believe that it's unfair, this distribution of income and wealth, press 1 on your telephone keypad, and if you think it is not necessarily unfair, press 2. And once people submit their votes, their views, then we can have a discussion about it. So press 1 if you think it's unfair that the top 1% receive 24% of national income, and press 2 if you think it's not necessarily unfair. And we will quickly check the results. And of those of you who voted, it's 63% believe it's unfair, this distribution of income and wealth. 37% say it is not necessarily unfair that the affluent take in 24% of the income and a third of national wealth. So what I would like to do is to hear arguments or reasons from those of you who have just given your views about distributive justice as it plays itself out in the distribution of income and wealth in contemporary American society. So if you would like to offer a view on either side of this question, press *3 on your phone, offer your view either in defense or in criticism of this distribution of income and its fairness. And once people submit their views, we will begin to have a discussion. Another way of approaching the question of distributive justice when it comes to income and wealth, apart from the statistics of the kind that we've just considered, is to look at some actual income disparities, pay differentials. Let me give you a couple, which I discuss in the book. What do you suppose is the average pay for a school teacher in this country? What would be your guess? It's actually about $43,000, the median pay for a school teacher. Compare that to what David Letterman makes. What do you suppose David Letterman makes? It's $31 million. Now, here's a question for justice. It comes up in the debate between libertarians and egalitarians, for example. Would you say that David Letterman morally deserves to make over 100 times what a school teacher makes? And if so, on what grounds? Here's another comparison. The Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, makes $220,000 per year, roughly. But there's another judge who makes more than even the Chief Justice. Do you have any idea who it is? It's Judge Judy, the television judge. She makes $25 million a year. So here's another question of distributive justice. On what grounds, if any, would you say that Judge Judy morally deserves to make over 100 times what Chief Justice John Roberts makes? So we've been discussing some questions about distributive justice in relation to the actual distribution of income and wealth that currently prevails in the United States. Let's begin to take some comments and discussion of people on either side of this question. Let's start with someone who believes the distribution of income and wealth is unfair. We'll go to Lee. What do you say, Lee?
2 points. First, those who make more than $250,000 under the current proposal will receive a tax cut for the first $250,000.
Sure, that's true. That's true.
And the second point I want to make, which is probably the more important point, is that studies have shown that the investment from that top 1% is not as efficient in stimulating the economy as taking some of their earnings in taxes and investing it in new enterprises or more viable, productive
Sure.
ends.
Right, I understand, and this is one of the economic arguments that is often made that the tax
that
cut
would be
to
a
those.
utilitarian argument.
It would be,
Yeah.
and the practical economic considerations about the effect of tax cuts for those in any particular income bracket on jobs and economic growth and consumption and investment. These are, as Lee rightly identifies, utilitarian considerations. What I would be interested in hearing from you, Lee, or for others who would like to phone in their views, you just press *3 if you would like to join the conversation. Putting the utilitarian aspects of the debate to one side, the question about what will be the actual effect on jobs and economic growth. Is there a principled argument, do you think? You voted, Lee, that it's unfair that the top 1% receive 24% of national income. Is there a principled reason, utilitarian considerations aside, why you think that's unfair? What's wrong with it? Go ahead, Lee. Sorry, I think we've lost Lee. All right, Lee, I'm sorry we've lost you. If you want to call in again, press *3, and we will continue. So we've been discussing questions about distributive justice, whether an unequal distribution of income and wealth is unjust in and of itself for reasons of principle, or whether it is defensible. And we're inviting people to offer up their views. Now, let's go to another caller, Roger, who disagreed that it's unfair, who said it's not necessarily unfair. Roger, tell us your thoughts.
Yes, sir. It seems to me if you adopt a perspective from the point of view of virtue politics, or an Aristotelian or Aristotelic point of view as to the purpose of government, in which the purpose of government is to encourage a virtuous citizenry in which human beings can flourish, the proportion of income going to any segment of the population is less important than that all people have access to the basic resources needed for basic flourishing. So maybe a social minimum would be guaranteed. But you'd be less concerned with the distribution of wealth and income. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, it's interesting that Roger raises the question of virtue and of civic virtue as applied to the question of distributive justice. Very often, the question of how to distribute income and wealth is argued in terms of fairness to those on the bottom. Is it unfair that some have more and others less of the good things in life? But Roger says, tell me if I've got you right, Roger, that there's another way of thinking about this, which has to do with creating a virtuous society, cultivating civic virtue, making sure that every member of society, every citizen, is a full participant in the common life. And for this purpose, what matters is that everyone have access to a decent basic minimum standard of living, that there be a basic safety net that doesn't allow anyone to live an undignified life, but that beyond that there's no objection in principle to differences of income and wealth. Roger, do I have you right?
Yes, you certainly do. And I was wondering also if you thought that might relate to what's going on in Great Britain now with David Cameron's Big Society movement, as explicated by a man named Philip Blond, who wrote a book called Red Tory, where he seems to be urging something along those lines.
Right. And for those who haven't been following it, in Britain, of course, David Cameron of the Conservative Party recently became Prime Minister, and he has described his governing vision as that of the big society, which he says, Prime Minister Cameron says, is different from the Margaret Thatcher idea, which is a celebration of the pure laissez-faire free market philosophy. The big society is meant to be an alternative conservative vision that emphasizes civil society and forms of community intermediate between the individual on the one hand and the state on the other. So Mr. Cameron is a critic of the welfare state, but not in the name of an unfettered free market, instead in the name of what he calls the big society, which is trying to build up the intermediate institutions of society, civil society, in hopes of cultivating civic responsibility and participation. Now, I think this is a gesture toward a tradition of political philosophy that emphasizes citizenship and civic virtue, whether he'll be able to pull it off, whether he'll be able to give it substantive content beyond the term the big society is an intriguing challenge worth following. But I do think that Mr. Cameron's idea of the big society does at least attempt to give meaning to the tradition of civic virtue as a way of thinking about politics. So thank you, Roger, for that question.
Thank you.
Maureen, if we could turn to Maureen, you voted that you think a distribution of income that has the top 1% taking in 24% of the national income, you think that's unfair. Can you tell us why?
Yes, I think that the reason that 1% have 24% of the income is because they're making it off the backs of the people who are, poor and working and making minimum wage. And those are the people who are doing the actual labor are making those people rich. And, I have no objection to people with higher education levels and more skills making more money. But come on, who needs $21 million every year to live on? And those advertisers who are paying David Letterman, yes, David Letterman gives up a lot in his life. He gives up all his privacy and, he gives up a lot for that money. But I'm sorry, that's way too much money. It's not worth that. We're all equal. Each one of us human beings are equal. We all should have, I think, equal opportunities to, live a life of freedom and happiness. And I think that anyone who is relegated to make minimum wage, there's no way that they can survive in this society on minimum wage. So,
Maureen, let me put a challenge to the argument that you've just made and see how you would respond to it. A libertarian, a defender of a laissez-faire, free market theory of justice, might put the following challenge to you. Might say, look, maybe it's a good thing if David Letterman donates some portion of his $31 million to worthy causes to help those less fortunate. But does the state really have the right to coerce David Letterman, or for that matter, the successful and affluent members of the society? Does the state have the right to coerce them against their will to contribute a portion of the earnings that they have made freely, fairly, without coercing anybody? Does the state have that right? And if so, on what grounds? What would you say to that challenge, Maureen?
I believe that the state may, perhaps through taxation, does have the right to try to even up society and to try to give every citizen, an equal opportunity to live in peace and freedom and justice and happiness. Because, especially in the United States, where our Constitution says that we all have equal rights to seek happiness and that a person, believe me, a person who makes minimum wage, there's no way that they can seek happiness. I mean, they can find happiness within themselves, but, it's just so unequal. So okay. I believe that, if David Letterman wants to donate to causes, that's great. That's wonderful. It's fabulous. I'm sure he does. But I think the government needs to tax people who make huge incomes like that.
Okay, Maureen. Thanks, Maureen. All right, it's a good response. Now, I want to turn to Ryan, who voted that it's not necessarily unfair that there be these big pay differentials. Ryan, have you heard Maureen's argument? And if so, what would you say to it?
Well, I do definitely see the points in her argument for why it would be necessarily unfair. I mean, sure, there are definite reasons for why, it does seem really unequal, unfair, that, there is a level of poor and unwealth in the country. However, I think you have to come to realize the amount of work and success that the top 1% they put into their work and business, or however they make their money. Like I mentioned before, how David Letterman, he obviously makes millions of dollars. However, you have to take into consideration the amount of work that guy does for his business and his job. So it's a really great area on how you want to measure success. And I think you made a very good point earlier on how much the Chief Justice makes in comparison to Judge Judy. Now, that actually may be a problem when the Chief Justice is actually getting less compared to Judge Judy, who I think obviously doesn't really make much sense to be making that much money, but that's a whole other argument.
Well, you mentioned, Ryan, effort, and yet it might not necessarily be the case that David Letterman, He may work hard. I assume he does. But does he really work harder, that much harder than the average school teacher? Probably not. So if effort is not the basis, and Ryan, before you answer this challenge, I want to remind other listeners that if you want to join the conversation or give your view, all you need to do is press *3 to join the conversation. Ryan, if effort is the moral basis of distributive justice, what about the fact that the school teacher, a conscientious one, probably expends at least as much effort on her job or his job as David Letterman does on his?
Well, I absolutely have to agree at that point you make there. But like I said before, the amount of work that goes into a job, I mean, how do you measure something like that? It's a really gray area. And my parents, they're teachers themselves, and I know for a fact that they probably don't make nearly as much as they should be. So I really appreciate that point you're making. But I think where I'm coming from is the philosophy basis of the American dream. You know, the harder you work, the more success you're going to have, and that's a huge American value right there. Now, I don't know how much that value is exactly followed in today's times. I mean, I haven't really seen a study on that, although I'd love to see exactly how many people believe in the American dream these days, especially since we are in an economic crisis, and it's probably the American nightmare at this point. But, yeah, it is a really great area, and it would be really hard to measure.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Ryan. Ryan makes the point that rewarding effort is a big part of the American dream. If you work hard, you deserve to get ahead. But really what these examples and the discussions we've been having call into question is whether effort and working hard is the basis of moral desert, or whether contribution to the society or to what the market says people want or to the common good, should contribution be the basis for moral desert? After all, you could imagine, take Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan made millions because he was a great basketball player. A lot of people wanted to see him play. There was great demand for tickets to see Michael Jordan play. Now, he practiced hard, but there are other basketball players who practiced as hard, maybe harder than Michael Jordan. And yet, few people would say that those who practiced even harder than Jordan deserve a bigger contract than his. If that's true, then even, as Ryan says, though the American dream says hard work should be rewarded, effort and work don't seem to be the only basis for justifying differences in income and wealth. I would like to put another question for us to vote on another topic, but before I do, let's take a couple of more callers on the question of income distribution and distributive justice. Press *3 if you'd like to join the conversation. Let's hear from Jeffrey, who has a reply to Ryan about the notion of effort being rewarded. Jeffrey.
Hi. I just, this whole notion of effort, I would say that a lot of investment bankers put a great deal of effort into defrauding investors. Essentially, their effort in and of itself, I don't think is a sufficient criterion for social reward or financial reward. There have to be other kind of safeguards there and other kind of criteria about what's beneficial to society.
Okay, well, that's
not a question; it's an observation.
Well, okay, but may I put a question back to you, Jeffrey?
You certainly can.
All right. If you think that effort is not a sufficient basis for a just distribution of income and wealth, what else should count? And if you like, are you still there, Jeffrey?
I am.
Okay, you're thinking. It sounds like you're thinking. I can hear you thinking. I mean, if you want, you can address the example of Judge Judy's $25 million versus Chief Justice John Roberts' $220,000. Who, by the way, while you're thinking, who deserves to make more between the two of them, do you think, morally speaking?
Between Judge Judy? Well, it doesn't particularly bother me that the entertainment industry rewards people more than I don't think that Judge Judy is doing something which I consider to be damaging to society or should be made illegal or should be boxed in by governmental safeguards.
But you do feel that way about the hedge fund managers and the bankers on Wall Street.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a difference between running a commercially successful business, which maybe you can say Judge Judy does, and doing something which is essentially criminal insofar as it undermines the common good. I don't see Judge Judy undermining the common good. I see what hedge fund managers have done as undermining the common good.
Okay, so what the touchstone, the moral touchstone for you, Jeffrey, as I understand it, is that distributive justice should be based on contribution to the common good, that we first, in order to decide what a just distribution of income or reward is, we have first to figure out what counts as contributing to the common good. And by your lights, being a Wall Street banker engaged in questionable financial practices certainly doesn't. But that's the question we would have to ask ourselves and debate as a society. Do I have you right?
I suppose. I mean, you're constructing it as contributing to the common good, and I'm constructing it as not taking away from the common good. I mean, I suppose those are the same thing.
I see. But by that measure, now Judge Judy, you said, doesn't detract from the common good. She's not committing any kind of fraud, even though it might not be the most edifying form of entertainment. But compare her pay to that of a school teacher. Morally speaking, wouldn't you say that a school teacher who contributes more to the common good, arguably, than Judge Judy deserves to make as much, if not more, than Judge Judy?
They deserve to make more than they're making.
I see. But you wouldn't go all the way.
Correct.
Very good. All right. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I know there are others who have thoughts about the questions we've been discussing here to do with distributive justice in income and wealth, but I do want to put to those of you who have joined us another question of justice, and then we'll allow time at the end for general questions that people may have in mind about the book or about issues of justice generally. But I would like to put another poll question. And I want to remind, all right, here's the poll question. It has to do with affirmative action. Some of you may have seen in this morning's, in the Sunday New York Times supplement on education, an article about the proliferation of applications by high school students to colleges and universities around the country. And this is the season of college applications. The number of applicants for most colleges and universities have gone up and up over the last 10, 15 years, so that the top colleges and universities are now able to accept only about 7 or 8 or 10% in some cases of the students who apply. There is intense competition for admission, which raises the question, what is a fair way of admitting students to top colleges and universities? And one of the forms that this debate takes is a debate over affirmative action. We've just been discussing the topic of affirmative action in the course I teach on justice here at Harvard, and I'll tell you in a moment the results of a poll I took among my students. But first, I would like to put to those of you who are listening the following question, and we'll see what the distribution of opinion is on the question of affirmative action. Let me make it very concrete. Let me take a recent federal court case that tested affirmative action which I write about in the Justice book. It involves a young woman called Cheryl Hopwood. Cheryl Hopwood was not from an affluent family. She worked her way through high school and community college in California, and then she moved to Texas and applied to the University of Texas Law School. She had good GPA, 3.8, and pretty good LSATs, but she was not accepted to the University of Texas Law School. And she thought that her denial of admission was unfair. She said it was unfair because some students accepted instead of her were African American and Mexican American students who had lower grades and test scores than she did. In fact, those who had her grades and test scores and who were African American or Mexican, all of them were actually accepted. So she took her case to the federal court, claiming that she was the victim of reverse discrimination, that she had been unfairly denied a place at the University of Texas Law School. The law school, for its part, said, part of our mission is to produce a diverse class and to produce lawyers who will be able to contribute to the civic and legal and political life of the state of Texas. And since 40% in the state of Texas are African Americans or Mexican Americans, we want a class that includes a good number of qualified students from those minority groups. So here's our next poll question. Is it just to consider race and ethnicity as a factor in university admissions? If you think it is fair to count race or ethnicity as a factor in admissions, press 1. If you think it's unfair to consider race and ethnicity as a factor in university admissions, press 2, and we'll see what the distribution of opinion is. So press 1 if you think it's fair, it's just to consider race and ethnicity as a factor in admissions. Press 2 if you consider it unfair. And while the votes are being tallied, I'll tell you what my students said in response to a similar poll when we were discussing this issue just last week. Believe it or not, they were divided right down the middle, just about 50-50 on the justice of affirmative action admissions. Now, we have the results from you, from the listeners, and 58% have voted that it is fair to consider race as a factor in admissions, race and ethnicity, 42% unfair. So by a margin of 58 to 42%, those of you participating in this discussion believe that affirmative action in university admissions is fair or justifiable. I would like to hear from people on both sides of this question. So please press, if you'd like to offer us your view and join the conversation on the affirmative action question, press *3 and tell us what you think. Press *3 to give us your views on either side of the affirmative action question, and then we will have a debate about it. And while people are phoning in to offer their views on the affirmative action question, I will tell you what happened in that court case with Cheryl Hopwood. The federal court that heard her case ruled that she had been treated unfairly and that she had to be admitted. The U.S. Supreme Court, though, did not hear the case, and so the current U.S. Supreme Court position on affirmative action still permits colleges and universities to count race and ethnicity as a factor. This goes back to the Bakke case in the 1970s, when by a 5-4 margin, the court permitted colleges and universities to consider race as a factor. But the case of a question of affirmative action is likely to come before the U.S. Supreme Court again. It did recently in the case of New Haven firefighters, whether in hiring and firing firefighters, affirmative action considerations were legitimate, and the court there said no. So we could be in for another round of debate about affirmative action in higher education. So let's now see, do we have, press star 3 if you would like to give us your view on Cheryl Hopwood's case and the case of affirmative action. And then we will be able to have a discussion on both sides of it. In the case of the firefighters, the question before the Supreme Court was whether it was a violation of equality, of equal protection under the laws for the New Haven Fire Department to take race into account in deciding who would be a firefighter. And so that was the first time that the current court has had an opportunity to take up the question of affirmative action, but they have not yet taken it up in relation to higher education. Your vote in this forum was 58% defending, 42% criticizing the fairness of affirmative action in higher education. Press star 3 if you would like to join the discussion and give us your view. So while we're thinking about that, one thing that you might consider as you are phoning in and offering up your view is the principles of justice that were at stake in the discussion we had about income and wealth distribution. To what extent are they similar, and to what extent are they different when the good being distributed is not money, not income and wealth, but instead access to a socially important opportunity, such as a seat in the freshman class at a good college or at a good university. In the Bakke case, back in the 1970s, the argument that was accepted by the court was the diversity argument. The argument put forth by many colleges and universities that they want to consider race and ethnicity as well as geography and other sources of diversity in order to make a better educational experience for everyone. And the most powerful argument against the diversity argument was that it violates individual rights, that applicants like Cheryl Hopwood deserve to be considered according to their own individual merits, and that it's wrong to deprive her of a chance in virtue of a quality over which she has no control, namely her race or ethnicity. Another dimension of diversity that is increasingly coming to matter for colleges and universities is gender. There have been a number of news stories recently suggesting that women, for many colleges, are outnumbering men in the applicant pool, and colleges want something like a gender balance, which means affirmative action for men in some cases. Is that fair? So let's see now if we can turn to someone who can get us started on the question of affirmative action. Let's go to Brian. What do you think?
Hello?
Yes?
Oh, yeah. My two main points were that I believe that affirmative action helps to, balance out the discrepancy or the unequal distribution of income in this country. Clearly, the bottom half of people earning money are people are minorities, are blacks, Latinos. So I believe that gives them opportunity to rise up the ranks. Also, I don't believe that it's a rational or reasonable argument to say that a white person was not admitted to a university because a black or Hispanic person was admitted. Because on most, at least top universities, blacks and Hispanics make up roughly 14 to 15% of the population on campus. So you're really competing against the 67% of white people on campus. So I think it's an unfair argument.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for that. Brian, will you hold on, because I want to I want to hear from Diana. Diana holds the opposite view from yours on affirmative action. Let's hear from Diana, and then go back to and then Brian, maybe if we lose you, can you call back? Listen to Diana, call us back, and then you can give a reply. We'll have an exchange. Diana, can you tell us your view?
I just would say that I think it's important to consider. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it would be more important to consider socioeconomic status, because sometimes, like race is definitely a consideration, and the majority of Black people and Mexican people in this country are poor. But there are also white people who are poor, and that if you come from a certain socioeconomic background, that you might face as many challenges getting into college as someone who is Black or Hispanic.
Right.
Or a minority.
And so you would say consider the socioeconomic background, the class background of the students who apply, but not their race or ethnicity.
Well, I think that if you take his socioeconomic status into consideration, that by default it would also extend to race.
And let me... Sorry, go ahead, Diana.
Well, I was thinking that, if you happen to be Black or Hispanic, but you come from a family where your parents went to college and your parents have, a better amount of money, then you might actually have more privilege in getting into college than someone whose parents didn't go to college but who happens to be white,
Right. Now, Diana, insofar as you're concerned with removing obstacles for those from poor backgrounds to gain an education, I'm trying to see if we can get at the principle that you're appealing to here. For you, the case for affirmative action is not so much diversity of the class. It's taking into account the obstacles that students who may have gone to poor high schools have faced, and giving them a leg up, giving them fair opportunity to compete. Is that the principle at stake, would you say?
Well, what I would say is that I think diversity is important, but I also think that class diversity is possibly as important as racial diversity.
Okay, so you accept in principle, you accept the diversity rationale, but you think that class may be at least as important a form of diversity as race or ethnicity.
I do.
All right, let's let Brian, who defends affirmative action based on race and ethnicity. Brian, if you're still with us, what would you say to Diana's point?
I have to concede kind of her point. It's a good argument. So because I hate to admit it, but I've known, I've been through the whole college application process, and I've known plenty of very well off, Black or in this case, Puerto Rican people who they were able to. Maybe they did get a leg up, and it wasn't necessarily related to their socioeconomic standing. So it's a good argument. I have to just kind of bite my lip and say, well done.
So Diana has persuaded you, Brian.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, now, so what I would like to hear from more people who believe that race and ethnicity, that it's fair to count race and ethnicity even beyond considerations of socioeconomic class. Press *3 if you would like to join this conversation, and in particular, if you, unlike Brian, think that race and ethnicity should count independent of class background. Press *3 to join the conversation. In the meantime, let's Irene. Let's ask Irene to join us. Irene, what do you think?
I am a strong supporter of diversity, but I do think that merit has an edge over diversity. But aside from the question of merit, I think if it's unfair to use race or ethnicity to keep someone out of an organization, then it logically is unfair to use it to get someone in.
So if tell us more. The examples of using race or ethnicity to keep people out, these are familiar and historic examples of segregationist policies in the past, keeping African Americans out of many universities, anti-Jewish quotas that were employed by the Ivy Leagues, among other colleges, in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. If those are wrong, you say, if it's wrong to use race and ethnicity to keep people out, it's equally wrong to use race and ethnicity to give people an edge. That's what you say.
Yeah, I hate to say wrong to give them an edge, but I do think it logically is unfair. If it's picking and choosing which side of the coin you're in favor of and discounting the other side. There is a double-edged sword there.
All right, now Irene, may I put to you a challenge to your view and see what you would say?
I was afraid you were going to do that. Yes.
Well, earlier in the conversation, when we were talking about income and wealth, remember, Jeffrey said the common good should be something we take into account in figuring out what justice is. Now, suppose someone listened to the point you've just made and said the difference between the old-fashioned segregationist or racist exclusions and contemporary affirmative action is that the common good is being served by counting race and ethnicity as a plus today. The common good of achieving a diverse class so that students are exposed to kids from various backgrounds, and the common good of educating lawyers and other professionals and leaders for the future who come from different backgrounds and walks of life. The common good of creating a more diverse classroom and a more diverse society is served by counting race affirmatively, whereas the common good was not served by the traditional racist or anti-Semitic quotas, which were based on a sense that members of those groups were inferior. What would you say to that attempt to distinguish the two practices?
I think that there are a lot of other areas and avenues where diversity can be encouraged and supported so that hopefully our society becomes more inclusive and comfortable with those who are different. But I think if you are speaking of an educational institution, I believe the common good is better served by allowing those who are superior is certainly not the right word, but who are more capable of utilizing what they learn to go out in the world and serve the common good or enhance the common good. I think education is a unique environment. If you have someone who is less qualified and is admitted because of race or ethnicity, and someone who is better qualified is kept out, the common good may be served in terms of promoting diversity and tolerance, but in terms of getting the best people to do the job, common good may not be served as well.
Now, if one final question, Jean, and then I want to allow people to ask general questions about justice or about the book. Press *3 if you would like to ask a question or offer your view. We have a few minutes left, and I want to allow for the possibility of some general questions and discussion. But here's a final question that I would like to put to Irene, if I may. Let's take the example of hiring for a police department. The argument is that what counts as doing a good job may include the ability to relate easily and effectively with the people in the neighborhood for law enforcement purposes. and that may involve coming from a certain community. Is it possible that in a case like that, take the example of hiring police officers, that what counts as the ability to do the job could have something to do with the community from which one comes, including race or ethnicity?
Yes, but I would think that in, say, applicants for the police academy, there would be a broad spectrum of individuals. I don't know what the requirements are to get into a police or a fire academy. I can see the value of having a diverse group of people going through the academy. Same with teaching. If you're teaching in an inner city school where there is a heavy Latino population or a heavy black population, then those teachers coming from that background may be able to relate better to those kids. But I still think that, because if you follow that logic, then somebody, say a white teacher who is top-notch, who's empathetic, who will put herself out or himself out 110% versus somebody who may be black or Latino who is going to be a decent teacher but maybe just goes in and does the job, I think you have to say, logically speaking, the person who has the better qualifications in terms of ability and motivation and what they're willing to contribute has the edge.
Okay. Irene, thank you very much for that. I want to remind people that we want to leave the floor open for any general questions, comments, queries, arguments related to the Justice book or to themes of justice as they arise in contemporary society. Press *3 if you would like to ask a question or make a comment before we're through. But while people are gathering their thoughts and phoning in their comments or general questions, I'd like to turn on the affirmative action question to Jean. Jean, you're a defender of affirmative action, is that right?
Yes, I am.
And how would you respond to the arguments that have been made by Irene and others who question the fairness of counting race or ethnicity?
Well, maybe this is a cop-out, but I think the mission of the organization has something to do with it. I mean, for example, a university is founded usually with a mission of having diversity, or that becomes part of their mission. Whereas, for example, the New Hampshire Fire Department does not have that as a mission, where it still could be argued, though, that having, someone of the community might do a better job. That's part of the job qualifications. It's not part of diversity. So I don't know.
Right.
I'm one of those people who says it all depends. It depends on the mission.
Okay, but it's a very interesting idea, and it's actually an idea that I use in the book to connect the debate about affirmative action to the philosophy of Aristotle, believe it or not, because Aristotle argued that we can't answer any questions about what's just without first thinking through and sometimes arguing about the mission or the purpose or the point or the goal of the thing we're distributing. And so, Jean, you say it's a cop-out. It isn't a cop-out at all. It's actually, what you've done is to point us to another theory of justice, a theory of justice that says we can't decide what is a fair way of admitting students to the university without really debating what is the purpose or the mission of a college or a university. Is it to promote academic and scientific excellence, in which case certain criteria will be fair? Is it also to perform a civic mission, in which case a broader range of criteria may be fair? So, Jean, what Jean has raised really is an approach to thinking about justice that goes beyond questions of fairness to the individual and raises broader questions about the mission or the purpose or the point of the social institution in question. I've been inviting people to also raise some general questions that may be on their minds about the book or about justice, and I want to do that while we still have a few moments. Ray, if you're there, tell us your question.
Yes. In conjunction with your book, I read a book by Mortimer Adler about six big ideas. Are you familiar with this book?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. It's an old book. In any case, he talks about justice and liberty being separate concepts, and he says that justice involves meeting human needs, at least sufficiently. One human need is liberty, but there are many other human needs, and so he says justice involves balancing all of those human needs, and sometimes justice requires restricting liberty, that justice requires fulfilling liberty, but sometimes restricting it.
Okay.
I want to know, how does that compare to your view of the common good? Is that the same thing as saying justice is all about the common good, or is it a different concept?
I suspect it's different, and I'm not sure that I would embrace Mortimer Adler's account as you've described it, but I would think of it this way. In the book, I lay out three different ways of thinking about justice that go back to the tradition of moral and political thought. One way, the first way, says justice is about maximizing utility, seeking the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. The second way of thinking of justice has to do with freedom, with respecting each individual's right to choose his or her own way of life. That's what justice is, according to the second view, the freedom school. And the third approach has to do with civic virtue and the common good. What way of distributing goods will promote the common good and will educate citizens in civic virtue? And this third tradition goes back to Aristotle. So those are the three. There are other ways of describing the map, the tradition of political thought, but these three ways seem to me the clearest and the most compelling way of dividing up the major approaches to justice. And in the book, I try to give practical illustrations of these three. I'm told that I know there are other people who have questions and comments, and I so appreciate your joining in this discussion. But Ryan is telling me that we are at the end of our session, so I would like simply to thank all of you for joining in this discussion. I hope you enjoy reading the book, and let me turn things over to bring us to a close to Ryan. Thanks so much. Ryan?
Thanks, Professor Sandel, and thanks everyone for participating in the teleforum today. If you'd like to leave feedback on the event or regarding Michael Sandel's book, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do, please stay on the line, and have a good evening, everyone. Thanks.